Conversation Live from Pasadena Media Studios. And welcome to another episode of the Conversation Live. Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. Joining me today live is Edson, president of the NAACP Branch Pasadena, and Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, Michael Williams. Today we're going to unpack and have a very critical conversation about what's happening within the Black community. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule and joining me today. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I want to set this up because this generational thing, we're going to jump over. Last week at John Muir High School, students decided that they wanted to walk out in protest because the administration has decided that they are not allowed to wear do-rags. And we kind of want to get into that. But first, let's roll in this clip. It actually made national news.
High school in Pasadena, they're having a protest. Let's listen to the students protesting.
Unknowingly placing their flags and confidence in full rule, stripping away the very thing that lays down their hair for waves. Did anyone tell you that this is a new way of fighting this oppressive shame? The oppressive shame of black hair not being good enough. Drip or drown. School's supposed to be a safe place and renowned. Yet you're making it a place of discomfort and oppressive down.
Wow. Michael, what do you think about that? I mean, should students be able to wear do-rags and express themselves in however they choose to come to school?
Well, for one, the clothing is a form of freedom of expression. You tell a lot by what you're wearing. Even what we're wearing right now says a lot about who we are. So it is a form of expression. It's also very racialized when you purposely target something that is known among a culture, a certain culture of a certain race. I remember when I was in private school actually, they banned cornrows and having shorts below the knee. That is specifically towards black people or black young people. And so when you target a certain minority group for certain things that are a part of their culture, it kind of separates them and tells them that their culture is inferior or their culture is not acceptable within society, and it disenfranchises them further because of it.
Park it right there. Alan, what do you say about that?
I say that they've got bigger issues to deal with at John Muir High School regarding education of the students versus this issue of the do-rag.
Okay. I mean, what an example, because you spent some time on campus. You're there with the students from time to time. Can't they be, you know, one of the things we're talking about in the culture is black excellence, right? Does the uniform necessarily indicate what that excellence is? Can't they just be excellent? A 17-year-old senior told me, why can't I just be excellent wearing a do-rag?
They can be excellent, and that's for them to display. You know, when I was growing up, you know, we wore stocking caps, but it was more of a thing that we didn't leave the house with the stocking cap on. And so I'm more, you know, prone to, you know, kind of keeping some things in the house, and the do-rag would be one.
But how does that teach these students to be empowered? It seems like it's teaching them more conformity. Do as a structure and do as a system says if you are expected to get a measured result. I mean, would you agree with that, Michael?
I think it is teaching conformity, but it's also teaching non-acceptance. Like, it's teaching the kids that your background or who you are as a person is not acceptable. And so a lot of the times kids, when they go to school, because they feel like they're not accepted even in their own school or where they're supposed to be learning, it kind of leads them to want to drop out or want to disengage from the classroom, right? Because they feel like the teachers or the administration there is not accepting of who they are or their culture or their way of expressing themselves.
Now, you've been active, Michael, and I appreciate you sharing that with me. Your work with Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, I mean, you've actually been arrested for demonstrating. And that's just something that we don't really see from your generation. And Alan, you certainly know a generation where sit-ins were a very popular thing to do. What compelled you, because the burning question is we want to get to this disconnection, but the burning, what compelled you to actually join Black Lives Matter and actually take up protests and disrupt?
Well, I've always grown up, my parents always instilled with me, if you see something wrong with your community or in any space, you should say something or do something about it. And so when I saw what was going on in our country, not just recently, but throughout history, and when I started to open myself up to learning about history and seeing how it's now coming full circle within my generation, it led me to want to reach out and kind of find a place where I can help stop these things or help promote awareness about these things. And Black Lives Matter, to me, was the only organization that was pro-Black, was Black-led, that was actively in the neighborhoods or in the communities or actively pursuing the issues that were most affecting Black people as a whole.
Why not join the NAACP? I mean, this year they're celebrating 100 years right here in Pasadena. Why not join the NAACP?
I just didn't see the NAACP doing the work that BLM was doing. I think the NAACP, they do good work, but there's a lack of disconnect with certain people and certain issues with the NAACP. And so I wanted to be around the people. You know, one of the things that I love about BLM is that they not only use the people who have been killed by the police, his names, just to push a point, but they actually take in their families and take care and help their families after the trauma and be a support system for their families. And that's something that really resonated with me, and I saw that, and so it made me want to join BLM, where I didn't see that, again, I didn't see that in any other organization, including the NAACP.
What do you say to that, Alan? I mean, how do you bridge that gap? Because you're sitting on information, you're sitting on wisdom, you're sitting on experience, and I know, in fairness, you just became the president of the NAACP this year, so we're kind of going forward, but how do you see bridging that gap with our young people and not kind of making them feel like they're not welcome? Because that's something that I hear a lot from younger people.
Well, of course they're welcome. I think throughout our history, you know, young people have been kind of the catalyst for action. Social change, to me, is, you know, what type of action are you doing? So for many, many years, the NAACP, you know, hasn't seemed to be action-oriented. I cut my teeth as an environmental justice activist. And in doing so, you know, I kind of separated myself from the NAACP style of work. Because it just didn't feel like it was dynamic enough, but also hard-hitting enough. And so, you know, I learned my skill as an activist / organizer from a lot of the old school members of the Black Panther Party. And so, you know, the same things, the same ingredients are going to be required for us as well as Black Lives Matter is we're going to need people. And so whatever you can use to attract people to your cause, I'm for it.
Okay. 'Cause some have said that, last week we talked about identity politics, right? But and some says that there is basically a branding issue with the NAACP, and that none of my generation, certainly none of Michael's generations, identifies as colored. And so the language, of, you know, we can get in the nuance of language, but if language is important, how do you bridge that and identify with the younger generation? Because I believe it is the blackness or the black part of Black Lives Matter that, Michael, you said you were able to look squarely in the face and see yourself. How do you guys get over that hurdle?
You know, I think, you know, again, you know, our work should speak for itself. I was involved with an organization called the African American Development Association. And, you know, that was done purposefully. Mm-hmm. You know, this whole idea of colored, in today's vernacular, people of color is paramount. And so, you know, you may want to say that Du Bois had insights, you know, deeper than we even knew about than he did in 1909 with the establishment of the organization. Mm-hmm. And so, if you really look at the rainbow of colored people, we dominate the world. And so if you are doing some real strategic leadership, you should be able to benefit from all of those people, all those voices, because the experiences have been the same. And so, our struggles, I believe, get watered down because of lack of voices.
Okay. Well, when we look at the intersectionality, between the two groups, where's the common ground, for the NAACP and Black Lives Matter to find some common ground and work together? Do you see that in the future, Michael?
I think there's no reason why there shouldn't be some kind of bridge. It's just there's a lot of core principles that BLM has, that the NAACP has, that for themselves as well. They have certain principles of things that how they operate, and BLM has the way that they operate.
Let's talk about what are some of those principles so what makes them different? What are those principles for BLM?
I think BLM is not just about, and I think a lot of what happens, and we're talking about generational gaps, is a lot of what happens is we don't have the ideas of respectability politics. Mm-hmm. We don't just help people that look good on the outside, right? We help all kind of Black people. It doesn't matter if you are a college student or a business owner or if you were a gang member. It doesn't matter. If your life matters under the Black Lives Matter brand, and I don't think NAACP sees all Black people in that terms, and that's one of the reasons why we have a divide, because the leadership of NAACP is mostly all academics, people who have gone to school, and there's not a lot of room for folks who are from the communities that are most affected to make decisions and have impact within the NAACP. So I think that's one reason why we have a difference. Also, just to work with things like law enforcement. NAACP doesn't see a problem with working with law enforcement. BLM does see a problem with working with law enforcement. We don't think that working with law enforcement in the whole is beneficial to Black people ever.
Let's talk, and I want to talk about that, because that comes up often. I know there's this inside-outside game, and maybe some in the audience don't understand the backstory of where that mistrust comes from. Why won't you guys actually sit down with law enforcement? Because
we see law enforcement as a sick system. And so we're not going to work with a system that we think is poisonous from the core or from the root. I mean, with the history of the police department especially Los Angeles Police Department, has history of being racist. We still continue to see the racism in it. Also, because we sit down and we are with the families that are affected, I couldn't look one of the mothers of someone who was killed in the eyes if I had agreed to sit down and talk to one of the cops or the police department that's denying her child justice, right? To negotiate under the table, not getting her son justice or some mediocre ground on justice. It's either you get justice, it's either give their child justice, or we're going to continue to fight and we're going to continue to voice our opinion. There is no middle ground. There is no negotiation to be made about that. And so that's why we don't want to work with law enforcement, because we don't see them as a part of the solution. We see them as a problem.
Mm-hmm. In years past, Alan, the chapter here has honored law enforcement. And so I'm seeing kind of the difference in how the BLM feels about those relationships. I mean, why do you guys, as an organization, take an audience with law enforcement? I mean, I've sat down with them, I've interviewed them, and facilitated things, but I'm in a different capacity. So, as an organization, do you see their point, or why do you guys actually have those conversations with them?
Well, we are in the business of building relationships. My personal history would say that you're going to get ahead based on your relationships. Working with the police department is a very, very, tricky relationship. We can spend months and months, even years, trying to make the police force better. the question comes up, what happens when there's an incident? Well, when there's an incident that happens, we go back to square one again and begin all over again. And we begin to, try to find a common ground of trust and where we can fix the problem. I don't think policy is the way to fix problem. I think it's a behavioral situation. And we don't talk about that, or we don't get an opportunity to talk about the behavior, because we're all prone to have a bad day. Just that, if a policeman has a bad day and he's got a weapon, it could really make a bad day for somebody else. And so those are the situations that I really, are very sensitive, because, I know the chief, very good man as far as I know. We have very good conversations, but if the incident would have happened with injury to the brother that got shot at a couple of weeks ago, my tone might be a little different today.
Yeah, well, he was extremely lucky. Let me check in real quick. You're watching the Conversation Live. I'm your host, James Farr. Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. We're having a generational conversation here with Representative Alan Edson, who's the president of NAACP Pasadena, as well as Michael Williams, who is a member of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. Now, Michael, when you guys are demonstrating, when you're protesting, when you're speaking out about police matters, is it possible for you guys to humanize the officers and kind of see them through the lens of they're just people who have a tough job to do?
Well, here's the thing. So going back to what you said, it's not about police officers having a bad day. This is systematic policies that are racialized. If you look at any statistics, you can see that police target black people more than anyone, right? So it's not just a police officer having a bad day and shooting someone. It's a system that has been created to police black people and to target black people. And so we're not talking about just individual police having bad days. When we talk about the police and we talk about systemic police issues, we're talking about the system of policing. And so we're saying that the system of policing that is current is not helpful and is not beneficial to black people. And so unless it is removed, we cannot move forward and we cannot have any kind of justice. Again, if you look at the history of the police department, we've had many reforms within the police department. We keep coming back to the same issue. Black people are being targeted by the police. It's because of the systematic institution that it is why we keep coming back to an issue.
What changes, would you like to see? If Black Lives Matter could wipe the slate clean and say this is the prescribed solution for policing, what would that look like to you?
We would love to see the fact of police be demilitarized, right? Not having as much ability to use their force or their weaponized force. We'd love to see them defunded and have the money that goes through. Pasadena has over than 50% of the budget going to police department. If those monies were going to public resources, things like helping the Jackie Robinson Center have better access to resources, helping to have better things for schools like for John Muir, those things could be better if we had more money going to those facilities, and then we wouldn't need police to be policing our neighborhoods as much because people would have access and wouldn't be wanting to commit crimes in those neighborhoods. Ultimately, we would like to see a community without police where we have more public access to resources that help people instead of criminalizing them, sending them to jail, or having the police deal with them. And so those are the things that BLM wants to
But how do
reach.
we, just to play the other side of that, how do you have law and order if you don't have police? Who's going to police?
There's plenty of societies before the colonization of Africa and the colonization of the world that didn't have police type entities and still had law and order. There's plenty of other alternatives, ways of law enforcement or community protection that doesn't include police departments that roam cities looking for people to arrest or for specific people to arrest. And so there's alternative ways that we can look at, and especially through history and the lens of history that we can look at to make sure that we have communities that are not reliant on police to solve issues.
Okay. And I promised, Alan, that I wanted to give you some time to talk a little bit more, because we're coming up on the clock shortly, but I want to make sure that we understand what the NAACP Pasadena is going to be doing under your leadership going forward?
Well, my biggest initiative under my leadership is to get more people's voices heard in whatever domain that they may work in, or whatever domain they may be interested in. One of the things that's happening here in Pasadena is our numbers are dwindling. There's a lot of reasons for that, from higher housing prices, maybe lack of jobs, but
I think that's, and I don't want to cut you off because I definitely want to give some attention to that. I believe it goes back to pathology. So I think we got to go a little further upstream when we look at, yes, the housing market is one thing, the job market is one thing, but when you sell Big Mama's house, you lose that generational wealth to be passed down. So I don't know how we fix that, but I don't want to just gloss over it and say it's because of housing and job market. It's pathology. People are voluntarily giving up their stake in the city. So I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but go ahead and where you guys are going as an organization.
And so civic engagement is really my big focus. Pasadena is a city that's evolving right in front of our eyes. How much participation in that evolution is coming from African Americans? Who hears from African Americans? Who's checking in? The people that you have on this show are the same people that are always the talking heads. Well, there's opportunities for brothers like Michael to be a talking head in the NAACP, and to get the mic. And so, I want to see more of a real representation of the community, having an opportunity to get the mic, express themselves, express their viewpoints and their perspectives. And as we do that, we create a much healthier environment. People know a little bit more about one another. So it's just not about Pookie or someone else. These are real human beings, and their lives are being impacted one way or another on what goes on here. Today is, we're not really talking about the educational system. We touched on it a little bit with do-rags. Mm-hmm. But what about having some alternatives to the educational system as it's currently constructed? Nobody talks about homeschooling their children. If you really, 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 really loved your child, that might be the first thing you think about, because this current system is failing the kids.
I mean, well, that's certainly a certain level of privilege to be able to stay home and educate. So what as an organization, what are you guys doing on your outreach? How are you including people from the community? We have just about 3 more minutes before we got to get out of here.
Well, we're doing some basic things, with our membership. We're trying to orient our new members and renewing members just about what the organization's about. Mm-hmm. One of the larger things that we're doing is celebrating our 100 years in Pasadena. Mm-hmm. And so, NAACP in Pasadena, has fought against segregation, fought against Jim Crow in the city. So, we're going to continue to do the work that we do. Again, bring in more people. We've created a young adult committee that, we are, very, very interested in having their voices being heard and their ideas being implemented. Just to show that the organization is just not composed of a bunch of middle-class people that have professional careers and have a home already. Mm-hmm.
All right, you're watching The Conversation Live. I'm your host, James Farr. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. My guest today is Alan Edson, who is the president of the NAACP Pasadena Pasadena Branch. And my other guest is Michael Joseph Williams, who's a member of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. And I gotta say, Mike, you sharp, man. I really like, you sat quietly. I think you were saving, you were not holding no punches back. But you give hope, to what a generation can look forward to. For those in the audience, what you're looking at, I'm not gonna tell Alan's age, but he's 20 years older than me. And I'm 20 years younger than him, and Michael is 20 years younger than me. And so this cross-section of conversation here today was really to kind of understand the different perspectives and hopefully identify a bridge. So before we get ready to get out of here, we got just 2 minutes left. Michael, I'm gonna give it to you first. About 20 seconds, final thoughts.
So I think the final thought is that I think a lot of what is going on is not a generational gap, it's a gap in ideology. Black Lives Matter has a lot of older members who are understanding of what Black Lives Matter is reaching for and the goals that we're reaching and trying to accomplish. I think that it's about aligning ourselves and uniting ourselves around Black liberation and the protection of our people. Kendrick McDade was killed here in Pasadena, and he has still not gotten justice. And I think if the NAACP was to work with people here in the community to actually getting him justice, which he deserves, we could actually work towards those things. But it's about an ideology shift, and it's about uniting around people and protection of our people.
Perfect. Alan?
I guess my parting thoughts should be, we can get more together than being apart. And I think, that really would reflect and emphasize, just how strong our community is. So that'd be for me.
Well, I certainly look forward to seeing you both standing together in solidarity, working for the common goal of what your individual organizations have, but collectively. So again, I appreciate you guys taking time, joining me today, sitting here in the seat, and let's having this what can sometimes be an uncomfortable conversation. So again, thank you for watching the Conversation Live. I'm your host, James Farr. Next week, joining me is Skip Hickenbottom, and we'll be talking about economic sustainability, the local hiring, about the commercial property at 100 West Walnut, adjacent to the Parsons Corporation. My understanding is there's set-asides for $60 to $80 million that have been set for local hiring. Till we have another opportunity to speak with you, as always, Agape. I appreciate it, brother.
Thanks, sir.
I'm just sitting and talking. The Conversation Live is brought to you by